Welcome. Welcome to our webinar here. I'm so glad you all are able to join us. My name is Doris Gomez, and I serve as the Dean of Regent University School of Business and Leadership. And we are truly, truly honored to be able to share a few moments, the next hour or so with you as we help each other and you to navigate your businesses through this amazing, tremendously difficult time. A pandemic that we did not see coming, that none of us could have prepared for, but we are in the midst of it. And our business community is suffering and struggling. And so it is truly our honor to come to you via our individual Zoom screens and help you navigate this difficult time. I am joined today by some tremendous panelists, and I'm going to get right to introducing them to you, as I really don't want to take much time away from their time with you. So I'm going to first introduce Andrew Waits. Andrew is the founder and CEO of Waits Sensor Technologies, and he's also a graduate of our Regent University MBA program. You will learn more. Yeah. Yes. Here it is for Regent University's MBA program. He is a pioneer innovator and a serial entrepreneur, and you will learn tremendous things from him and from his years of experience as an entrepreneur in good times and in bad times. We also joined by Clark Mulford, who is the founder and CEO of Phoenix Systems. And Clark began installing home security systems while still in high school, and he has never stopped. He was an entrepreneur ever since, and he is now one of the Phoenix Systems is now the most successful privately held residential systems design and installation companies on the East Coast. So I'm glad that you get to hear also from Clark Mulford. Hi, Clark. And then we have Jason Benedict. Jason Benedict is the owner of Touchstone Business Solution. As Jason is an enterprise development specialist, and he's also a graduate of our MBA program here at Regent University. He also has served as strategist with the Regent University Center of Entrepreneurship, and I hope that Dr. Mulford, who I'm going to introduce just in a second, will share a little bit more with you all also about this center that he is leading. And last but certainly not least, our amazing and wonderful moderator and panelist, Dr. John Mulford. Dr. John Mulford is a wonderful, wonderful friend and colleague of mine. He is also one of the founding faculty members of the School of Business here at Regent University, and he held the title of Dean many, many years before I ever came on the scene. So I'm standing on his shoulders as the Dean. I'm so grateful for everything you've done, John, for the school, for Regent University. And John Mulford's passion is entrepreneurship. He founded and is currently also directing the Center for Entrepreneurship at Regent University. And I know he's gonna share with you a little bit more about that. But without further ado, let me just give it over to Dr. Mulford, who will moderate this evening for us and with us. John, take it away.
Well, thank you, Dr. Gomez. I had my welcome to everyone, and I just noticed we had someone join from Mozambique. So we've got people from all around the world, and they're staying up late. So that's a tribute to our panel, that people will stay up until the middle of the night to hear you guys. Just a few housekeeping items. You who are listening, we won't have audio or video for you, so you'll see us, but we won't see or hear you, but you can communicate through the chat function. So if you have a comment or a question, you can type it into chat and it will come to us and we'll be able to respond. Also, if you want to view just the person who is speaking at the time, you can click on the speaker view on the upper right corner of your Zoom screen, and it will focus on the person who's speaking at that time. So let's get started. Tonight's webinar deals with the pandemic and its effect on businesses. Now, you can imagine there have been major, major impacts on businesses. And so our panel tonight is really well suited because all of them have been through ups and downs of businesses and are also currently working with their own businesses and other businesses to help them through the pandemic. So I'm going to start by interviewing each of them. But before I do that, I'll just lay out the sort of our model for the evening. One is to hear from them each individually for a while to get a feel for what their experience in their business background is. And then we're going to talk about, so that will deal with what they've done in the past and also what they're doing to deal with the pandemic right now. And then we'll talk about what it might look like as this pandemic winds down or we start to come out of the massive close down of our economy and what some of the opportunities might look like. That's all for businesses, but there's plenty of people who aren't running their own business, but they're also impacted as workers in a business or maybe former workers in a business. And so we're going to talk about individuals as well and what this might all mean for you. So those are our three sections. And I'm going to start out with Clark Mulford. You'll notice the similarity of names there. We're brothers. He's the entrepreneur of the family. And so I'm not going to try to describe his business, but I know a lot about it. But Clark, tell us a little bit about Phoenix Systems and what your business is all
about. Well, we are considered systems integrators, but just people in the business know what that means. But we're basically electrical contractors that specialize in low voltage systems, like security being one of them, which is how I got started, but also computer-based control systems, computer networking, audio-video systems, that's surround sound systems and televisions and projectors and so forth. So, we work primarily for, or about 50% of our business is direct to production builders, big national builders like Pulte and D.R. Horton, that type of thing.
Okay, give me an idea of what a good month looked like before a downturn. You know, were you working on new construction and then also existing homes?
Yeah, we did almost 20 million in sales in 2006 with almost 8,000 individual rooftops of installations.
Uh-huh. So times were going really well in the early 2000s. Then tell me about 2008 and following.
Yeah, so we went from 8,000 installations in 2006 to 800 roughly in 2009. So that's a pretty big drop. And I'll tell you what happened, or what I had to do, and it was possibly the worst 2 days of my life. I had to lay off 100 people, and I had an HR person, but I said I want to do it myself, and I brought everybody into my office individually. Of course, everybody knew what was happening, and it was just heartbreaking. 50-year-old guys crying in my office. So it was so bad that I ended up getting a hotel room half a mile from my office because I didn't have the energy to drive home. So I lost many millions of dollars and got within a month of going out of business.
Mm. And yet at the beginning of that, as things, it wasn't quite as much of a drop off as this economy, I think. And you were good at managing a downturn, but it just got bigger than what you were used to managing. Is that a fair assessment?
Well, there's really two parts to that. But in 2001, I did about 850 installations. So I went back to 2001 budget, and I just emulated that. I stripped the office down of all its office equipment, and I had 50 vans that were leased, and I had to pay quite a significant early turn-in fee to get rid of those. But I was able to get the company lined up to make money, even at such a dramatic reduction in sales, and made deals with everybody, the landlord and so forth. And the real problem is I had about 40 local builders in the Atlanta area, and I had, and not one of them ultimately paid me. 39 of them went out of business, changed the names of their companies, and came back into business. And I do business with them today, but not only one of them paid me. The guy that paid me, his name is Dave Morrison, and he owns a company, and we do business with him today called Peachtree Residential. So a shout out to Dave Morrison for being the only ethical and honorable guy. And by the way, we paid every single bill, not in a timely fashion, I'll tell you, but we did not pay one vendor. And my my advice on that, and this is something that I really learned then. I communicated with anytime a vendor that I owed money to, I know why they're calling me. I took the call and I said, not only am I not going to pay you this week, I'm not going to pay you next week either. So, but if you call me, I'll answer the phone. So it was interesting that communication and honesty are the two keys to dealing with situations like we're in now.
Yeah. So what did the upturn look like after 2000?
It was slower than you'd think. One of the things we did, so I laid off 100 people and I kept 25, 12 of whom were technicians. And I said to them, I only have about 20 hours worth of work for each one of you, or I have 40 hours worth of work for half of you. And you guys tell me what you want to do. And they all said, we'll take the 20 hours and we'll all stay. And an interesting thing happened. And that was the end of my management of them, that in terms of the numbers of hours they got. If we had the work they got, it was made available to them. But they kind of negotiated between themselves. If somebody really needed the extra hours for financial reasons, the other technicians would give them some of theirs. So it was an incredibly interesting leveling out of the workload, which I had nothing to do with.
Wow. So the current situation, how does it compare to what you went through in 2008-9 in terms of the drop off, in terms of how you're handling it?
Yeah, well, our business is off about 30% now, but we still have business, and primarily because we do a lot of work in new construction, and the builders are still building and allowing us on a staggered basis entry to the houses. So we're still working, and that's good. But we haven't laid anybody off or let anybody go, but we have gone down to a 10-hour per day, 4-day work week that we're going to skinny up to 8 hours next week.
Mm-hmm.
So it's been very little impact on us.
And what do you see in the coming months?
Yeah, that's what really worries me. I think as people run out of money, they're going to stop buying things like houses and AV systems and the stuff we sell. Mm-hmm. So I'm nervous that it's going to fall off a bit more.
Okay, well, thank you, Clark. We'll be coming back to hear your thoughts on some other things, but I'm going to jump in now to talk to Andrew Waits, whom I've known for a long time, since he was a student at Regent. And I wanted Andrew to talk a little bit about the job that he got with a man who called himself the Buzzard, because he had a real boom or bust business. and Andrew was hired to sort of smooth that out. So Andrew, you want to just give us a little background on that?
Sure. The we didn't see the kind of bust that Clark saw when he. It's like his business went down 90% in '08. That's an amazing story to have come back from. But the company that I went to work for, the gentleman's name is Bill Hudson, and he kind of owns, if you will, or did at that time, the insurance salvage business, the retailable insurance salvage. So anywhere there was a fire, flood, earthquake, hurricane for in a retail environment, then this guy was a fellow that would go in and purchase, if it was a Walmart store, he'd buy the whole Walmart store. Whatever was left, it's a hurricane, earthquake, tornado, whatever they left, he would go in and buy. And there are maybe 4 or 5 companies like that in the country, of which this guy is the largest. Great business, great margins, very labor-intensive business, but nonetheless, very, very good business, except when there's no fire, flood, earthquake, or hurricane, and then it might as well be a pandemic. It's then times are very difficult, very slow, and they kind of live to fight another day to the next earthquake or hurricane. And so when he hired me, he hired me from Regent, and my job was to find a source of product that would level out, if you will, like Dr. Mulford said, would level out their buying and allow them to minimize the downturns in their store. So I had to find merchandise to fill in, if you will, between the earthquakes, hurricanes, and floods. And that's when we discovered customer returns from retail stores. And since then, there's a group of stores in the Southeast. Dirt Cheap is the name of the stores. And I don't know how many there are now, 60 or 70, I guess, that were started out of that concept of purchasing customer return merchandise from department stores, retail stores, maybe specialty stores, and then retailing it. We found a customer would buy a white shirt, even if it was missing a button, if it had a polo sign on it. So we were able to put together a retail concept that sells damaged or excess inventory.
So tell me how you turned that into your own business, IPS and eValueville.
Well, we worked for Bill for several years and learned a tremendous amount about that industry and about buying salvage merchandise or customer return merchandise. So after doing it for a couple of years, I thought, we're putting together deals that are large, and Bill Hudson takes a part of the merchandise, and someone in Maine may take another part. So basically, we put together a little syndicate of buyers so that each buyer could take advantage of the economies of scale of buying a big deal. And so I thought, well, gosh, I can do this on my own, just charge a little commission and have a nice business. I always wanted to be in business for myself. So Bill Hudson said, if you're going to do that, then I'll back you financially. And so he and I started IPS, Inventory Procurement Services, together, and that company exists to this day. And Bill is no longer part of it, but we still buy large deals, rather customer returns, excess inventory from department stores and retail stores, and then resell that to other stores in smaller lots, if you will.
So how did you turn that into being a big seller on eBay?
So when we were purchasing a lot of the merchandise that I explained, and one group of merchandise, there was, I've told this story so many times, some folks listening may have heard it a dozen or more times, but we turned it into there was a lot of leather coats. And the question was, what do you do with leather coats in the middle of May in South Mississippi? You can't give them away. I mean, there's really nothing, you cannot sell leather coats in South Mississippi in the middle of May. But what my assistant said, well, why don't we put them on eBay? I'd never heard of eBay, but I didn't care where she put them. If she turned them into cash, that was a good thing. So she sold them on eBay, and a leather coat that would have sold for $25 or maybe $30 at the most, we sold for $250. And I never claimed to be the brightest bulb in the socket, but if you're willing to sell it for 30 and it sells for 250, that's a good thing. And so we started learning how to scale that business, how to build the infrastructure, how to hire the folks that were necessary, and develop the skills to build a scaled business on eBay. And we did that. We were the largest seller on eBay, thanks to a gentleman who's named Rob Ratterman, who built our technology infrastructure and kind of entered my life in a later point. But Rob Ratterman built our technology infrastructure, and we were selling thousands and thousands and thousands of items a day on eBay. And this was merchandise that had the same source that I mentioned earlier. It came from department stores. It was either end of season or customer returns, but we built a business and were the largest seller on eBay for 2 or 3 years, I guess. And we employed 65, 70 people in total, most of which were single moms that we hired to list the merchandise, create the ad, and sell it on eBay. They were all paid for they were compensated on a production basis. So the harder they worked, the more they made. I always felt like that was the most fair way to pay someone, and it turned out to provide some I would say employment that we were able to educate some ladies that didn't know much about computers, so that they could leave us and then go and get a higher paying job down the road. That was our goal, was to teach them computer skills and send them on their way. And that's how we did that.
So how did you handle fluctuating supply? Because you told me once that sometimes the customer returns, at least they were either kind of shut off or not available at an attractive price.
Yeah, that is the challenge in that business. It as I explained it's not a very difficult business to get into. The barrier to entry is the supply of merchandise and having a consistent supply of merchandise. And being able to pivot to other merchandise, being able to move from retail to wholesale, we've shown that the best way to handle business, even in a pandemic environment, is to be flexible and to be able to pivot from one business to another business, or one distribution channel to another distribution channel. Really, your whole supply chain, as well as your primary distribution channel, needs to be as flexible as it can. And our goal was to also keep everything as variable as we could, so that we could be as elastic as we needed to. We could grow or we could shrink, depending on the amount of merchandise that we had. So we built the whole infrastructure, and kind of was in our DNA, was the ability to get really big when we needed to, and then at times when necessary to be able to shrink down. And all of that was determined by the supply of merchandise, and that was really key to making that business work, and continues to this day, being able to pivot depending on what the supply of merchandise looks like. Right now, for example, the supply of merchandise is non-existent. The retail stores are primarily closed. The spigot is turned off. However, when the spigot is turned back on, there's going to be a plethora of merchandise on the market. It's going to drive the price through the floor. It's going to be interesting to see how the whole supply chain for department store merchandise, how that works. We've never had a time like this where things have been cut off so suddenly and then the spigot turned back on so suddenly. So I predict lots of merchandise, and we'll have to figure out how to handle that if indeed that happens.
Yeah. Well, I remember one thing that you did, which put you in a very good position economically, was to have a very lean system, so that the companies that went and got a lot of venture capital and spent a lot of money could not really compete against you on a cost basis. So that, I guess, helps you as you're being flexible as well.
Well, absolutely. I think that's a really important point, actually, that if the less leverage that you require in a growth environment, the better off you are. And there are times to use leverage, and times when leverage is very positive, and leverage can significantly affect your ROI. However, leverage isn't always good. Debt isn't always good. There's healthy debt and unhealthy debt. And what we had during those days was a lot of unhealthy debt. I don't know if you can remember, but venture capitalists were funding anything that had a .com at the end of it. And we just chose that. We chose not to do that, to fund our business off of operations, and that proved to be the winner in the long run. We outlasted a lot of the other companies that were more leveraged than those that had taken venture capital.
Mm-hmm. So switching gears, your business now is called Weight Sensors. Tell us what that is and how you got into it.
Yeah, so Weight Sensor is a company. I mentioned Rob Ratterman earlier because he came back into my life and in a significant way with Weight Sensor. Weight Sensor is a company. Rob and I worked together for, I think we worked together for about 10 years developing a sensor that would monitor the temperature and vibration of rotating equipment. And so this little sensor is actually attached to a pump, gearbox, compressor, or roller. If you're in a distribution center, on rollers that handle, well, if you go in a distribution center, you're going to see the product going, and you'll see tons and tons, thousands and thousands of rollers. Well, those bearings go bad, and we developed a way to monitor the temperature and the vibration and predict when those bearings will fail prior to failure. And so Rob is the technology side of that business, also serves as the CEO of that business and runs it on a day-to-day basis. But the product that we develop is, I think we've probably installed more sensors than any other wireless sensor company in the world. And we have installed them all over the world, or at least countries in addition to the United States. And it continues to grow. It's a booming business.
So what is the pandemic doing in terms of that business? Are you seeing any effects?
Yeah, good question. So the pandemic for that business is more of a delay. We have, for example, one large company with multiple distribution centers that we were in the process of installing sensors in. We'd already run the test. I think maybe even got as far as purchase order for this company, but it was put on hold for the pandemic. One of our primary customers is the largest internet retailer in the world, and they put a hold on things and have just, I think as of next week, we will begin to have folks in their distribution centers. So for the pandemic, again, the whole thing of debt, there's healthy debt and there's debt that's not healthy. We were able to survive, kind of like Clark was saying earlier, we were able to survive a very lean time when we didn't have a lot of business because we were conservative during the good time and put back enough money that allowed us to weather this time. And there were maybe 65, 70 installers that would have been working during this period that aren't, and Waits would continue to pay them through this time. As it's really part of our culture to take care of our people, and we did that in a very tangible way during the slow time, and now it'll pick up, and those guys will all go back to work hopefully starting next week.
Great. Well, let me shift to Jason. Jason, you have been working with a lot of clients that have small businesses that you've been consulting with and mentoring and coaching. What are you seeing across various companies and industries?
Yeah, that's a great question. You know, it really varies by sector. There are some business sectors that are actually having record months. There are others that are somewhat affected. One of my clients, it was down about 15 or 20%. And then there are others that have had almost no income since this started. I actually thinking of a friend who has a wedding photography business. And, that business hasn't had any income since the start of this. And so there's quite the gamut of different things going on. And so, yeah, it really depends on the sector. If you're in one of those business sectors that's been deemed an essential service, then you're even if you're down a little bit, you may still have, some revenues during this time. And so it's the ones that don't have revenue that are suffering the most. Yeah.
So what are you advising them?
It's interesting. Yeah, keep as much keep the faucet turned on, keep as much revenue coming in as you can, and and manage your cash. It's interesting. One of the things that Andrew said, he talked about putting aside some cash. One of the metrics that I try to get all my clients to track closely is something we call days cash. And days cash is essentially your cash plus equivalents divided by your average daily overhead. And it's a metric it shows how many days of operating cash you have on hand. Axiomatically, I encourage clients to keep about six weeks of days cash, 45 days of cash. And so that, you would be surprised how many small businesses think that's an outlandish amount of cash to keep on hand. But, the wisdom of that is borne out in seasons like we're in right now. And really it varies by sector, right? I mean, some sectors, it takes a long time to pivot. And other sectors and business models, it takes a shorter amount of time to pivot. So that days cash figure, I try to get them to come up with an estimate of how long it takes them with their business model to pivot. And again, for most businesses, you can't do anything. You can't make meaningful changes to your business model in less than about 6 weeks. So that's where I get that 45 days cash figure from. And so, now, if you have gone into this time without cash reserves, then you're really struggling. And one of the things, if you ever go through a time like this, you realize that when you look at that income statement and you're trying to find places where you can cut, there are very few places in most businesses. There are very few places on their income statement where they can make a meaningful reduction. And the biggest line item is obviously payroll. And that's in most businesses, Clark mentioned this earlier when he was talking, most businesses, if they have a really serious decline in revenues, can't survive without cutting into that payroll line item. And so, the thing is, if you do have to cut there, obviously there's the payroll protection program. We've seen mixed results in people getting that. Some people, were kind of sandbagged by their bank and never even had a chance to apply. Others were able to get their application in early and have already received funds. So it's been a mixed result. But if you don't have that and you do end up having to cut people, the way you do that is important. We don't know exactly how long this is going to last. I'm hoping, we're all hopeful that we're in the last couple weeks, right? But if that's not the case, the worst thing you can have is this kind of rolling series of layoffs, because it absolutely destroys morale. And the people that you do have left are wondering, am I next? Am I next? Am I next? And they can't get down to that hard work of helping the company survive. I mean, you need those that remain on payroll to be all hands on deck and coming up with innovative ways to help you keep afloat as a company. And so one thing that I've encouraged people to do, I have business associates that work in the panhandle of Texas, and they've been really hit. Oil has been tremendously hit. They're serving the oil industry. And I said, you cut fast, you cut deep, and hopefully you cut once. And that is, and again, that day's cash figure, if you can do an estimate of what your cash burn is, and you can figure out, how much, if you can do those calculations, it can help you cut once. That's what you want to do. You want to cut deep, cut once, and try to avoid that rolling series of layoffs that is an absolute morale destroyer. So those are some of the conversations that I've been having a lot of over the last few weeks.
Well, Jason and I both worked on business development centers in other nations, helping people start and grow businesses. And it's almost like they've got a pandemic all the time. The level of resources they have to work with is extremely low. Money is very expensive. Borrowing from a bank might be 23%. And so it's very difficult to start and grow businesses in those environments. So it's interesting to see what some of them do that might be lessons for lean operating of a business here. And I'm just thinking of some of the small scale manufacturers, like somebody who made peanut butter, but they roasted the peanuts in their backyard on a fire. They had a little grinder in a room in their house, and then sold the peanuts, the packaged peanuts, through their church. So, and then they finally got into supermarkets. So very low overhead business. Another guy had a soap business, and he made soap in a residential area, at a house, a vacant house. He boiled his soap and then he delivered it by bicycle to a pretty large residential area. And so again, a very low overhead business. And one of our favorites is a guy who, he started a pork processing business. He'd get a few pigs, bring them into town in a truck, and then take them to a local slaughterhouse. Again, in a residential area, they don't have zoning there. And so he would pack his sausages and then take them to supermarkets and restaurants and hotels. And he was selling 1,000 kilograms a week just in this little operation. Well, when I went back, and the segue here is that some of these guys come up with innovative ideas that can actually be industry changers. So this guy, and he continued that business, but he went back through the supply chain and started investing in farmers who had never had a cash crop. And so he provides them with the animal, with the feed, with veterinary services and medicine, helps them grow that animal, and then he buys it from them, takes it to market, sells it, and shares the profits with them. So he's really restructuring the whole supply chain of meat in his nation, Rwanda. So there are some interesting things going on. Other people in young guys that are tech types, and so they'll write apps for cell phones. And one guy wrote an app to deliver medical advice in rural areas because there are no doctors there. And so he had his app, but he also tied into the app an ability to make donations to people who didn't have enough to afford healthcare. And you might do a few pennies at a time through the app, and it generated enough money to actually be able to help quite a few people with their medical needs. So there are lots of examples where people figure it out. And I think Andrew was talking about how he really ran lean with his business of selling on eBay and switching the way he was distributing. But I also saw his operation. I saw how lean he was able to operate it. And so these are just good examples of how not only can you save and not, save up some cash reserves, as Jason was saying. And I think Clark mentioned to me recently that the guy he has running his business day to day took a more conservative cash position, which they're happy to have now, more cash reserves. Is that true, Clark?
Yeah, that's very true. I made a good decision in 2015.
So these are just some ideas about how to operate your business when you're facing very difficult times. And in this case, the pandemic is certainly one of those. One of the things that I heard several mention, Jason talked about, don't do rolling cuts, try to figure it out and do it one time so you don't just crush morale. Andrew said, we keep our people on as much as we can. Clark said, I offered these guys and they figured it out themselves, that I was willing to keep 20, but I could only pay them at 20 hours a week. And so that's what they worked out. In fact, he's had some incredibly loyal people that worked under difficult situations. And then, now that times are good, they're doing well. So people is the key. If you can keep, now, obviously, if you lose 90% of your revenue, you can't keep everybody, as Clark mentioned. He had to lay a lot of people off. But, and I remember asking him, well, is this a good time to decide which people you want to keep? He said, I'm getting rid of all kinds of people I'd love to keep, because I'm cutting way below the deadwood. These are my good people, but I just can't keep them. And so that's just something you have to deal with if you're going to have to cut that deeply. So let's turn our attention to what we might do or what might happen in the future as the pandemic sort of winds down and America goes back to work and the rest of the world goes back to work. What kinds of industries or businesses do you think might be good opportunities, good growth opportunities? Anybody?
Well, we certainly see the sensor business as being a great opportunity, even beyond weights. Rob Ratterman and I, as we look at that industry, we think that we're just not even the tip of the iceberg of what can happen with sensors as they continue to get smaller and less expensive. There will be sensors on everything. And we want them to be weight sensors on everything. We used to tell people when we make presentations in an industrial plant years ago, we would say, look, we want this sensor to provide such value that you'll put it on everything, including the water fountain. And that really is what we think can happen with sensors, the value proposition as they get smaller, as they get less expensive, and as weights continues to gather the data necessary to make AI, to make artificial intelligence a reality. We're beginning to see that. We're monitoring 2 billion bits of data a day right now from all the sensors that we have. We know more about particular motors and gearboxes than the manufacturer. So as we take that data and make, we use that data, we weaponize it in the market in as much as it allows us in the marketplace to make a significant difference, because we will know more about equipment than anyone else, and we'll be able to serve those folks that own that equipment in a way that no one else can, because we're going to know more about it. So sensors are going to be huge. We really believe.
Yeah.
I did want to mention, because I said something about it earlier, and I don't know how the industry is going to handle so much extra merchandise. You know, department stores alone, just looking at the department store industry, they've been closed for a whole season, or there's been a transition of seasons while they've been closed. So those goods on their sales floor normally would have gone through a cycle and would have gone out the door. Well, now they're going to go out the door, but they're going to go out the door on pennies on the dollar. And I guess it's going to be interesting to see how that happens, but there'll be some wonderful buying opportunities in that industry. And I'm sure that inventory phenomena will flow over to other industries besides just the clothing and soft goods area. That just happens to be the one we know the most about.
Yeah. Well, the first one you mentioned about the sensors being something that was happening. It was a change that was happening that could possibly be accelerated. Are there any other businesses that you could think of where the pandemic might accelerate things? One I'm thinking of is the restaurant business, where there was a big move over the last 5-10 years to do order online, takeout, then delivery. And so more people getting food from a restaurant without actually sitting in the restaurant. And that seems to be something that would likely get accelerated coming out of the pandemic. Any thoughts on that?
Agreed.
I think I would see Jason, go ahead. I'm sorry.
I was just going to say, you remember when we all had landlines in our homes, and even after landline telephones became largely obsolete, that behavior endured. I think that there's a lot of consumer behavior that has been overdue for disruption, overdue for change, but it's endured because you haven't had the impetus. And like in the case of a landline, we had landlines until we moved, or until the telephone broke and we were standing in Best Buy or someplace like that looking to replace it. And we thought, why am I replacing this? I don't need it. So the behavior endured after its time. And I think there are probably 6 to 10 major industry sectors that are overdue for disruption. And I believe this is going to create the impetus for that. It's going to be that little impulse that it takes to nudge it over. And I was talking to someone in healthcare today, a doctor of nursing, and she told me that that all the different projects she's supervising, they're shifting. They've made the decision in the last few weeks not to go back to the way they've done things before. She's going to manage all of it online. Whereas before they did it through face-to-face meetings and that kind of thing. So they're actually overhauling the way they're going to work going forward, because they had a lot of latent behaviors that they just were a carryover from times past. And I think you're going to see hundreds of millions of little decision points like that across all kinds of sectors that are going to bring, some major disruption. Transportation and logistics, finance, insurance, healthcare, retail, there's going to be changes, a plethora of changes.
Yeah. So if you're not in that business, it might be a good one to get in during disruption. If you're in it, it might be one you're going to be hurting though as it gets disrupted. Can you think of any that you would want to not go near as the pandemic affects how things get done in the future?
Before we go there, could I just throw in one point on something that I'm observing?
Sure.
And that is that our normal sales process is we have a builder who has a design center that's outfitted with all our products along with rugs and countertops and so forth. We would send a salesperson to a design appointment to meet with the customer that was buying the house, if that makes sense to everybody. And that is a very expensive thing, especially in Atlanta, where you might have to drive for an hour and a half. But now the design centers are closed and we can't go to them, so we're doing everything online. And there's been a little bit of an adjustment period with Skype and Zoom and FaceTime, but the interesting thing is the customers are accepting it. We couldn't get them to accept it before. Now they're saying, well, this is the only way. Now they're starting to realize I don't have to drive and sit with this guy trying to sell me something, and I can do it online. So it's such a huge difference for us. We've got 26 salespeople, and that's all they do every day. And now their FaceTime with people is significantly higher because they have much more time. They're not driving.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that is going to be. There's a lot of businesses that are saying we can attract new employees. We can be much more efficient by using the technologies that we're using right now.
Yeah. What do you see this doing to real estate? I mean, you see a lot of department stores going out of business, malls going out of business, a lot of transition in the stuff that's already built. What do you think the real estate industry is going to look like?
I think the real estate industry is going to do exactly what I just described. I think they're going to have virtual demonstrations of their houses. I read some statistic about millennials, an astronomical percentage, I call it 20%, are buying houses without ever going to the house. They're just using Google Sky or whatever it's called, and viewing the neighborhood and driving around virtually the neighborhood, and then looking at the house and and then buying it sight unseen. For an old guy like me, that's pretty amazing.
That's awesome. That's awesome. That's awesome.
So I think we're getting to a point where we might want to have some questions. Do you have anything, Doris, that you'd like to bring?
Yeah, there have been several questions come in. There's one for you, Jason. If you could just please repeat the formula for the day's cash.
Okay, yeah, absolutely. It's going to be cash and equivalents, essentially. So from your balance sheet, you're essentially your bank account. So cash and equivalents divided by your average daily overhead. So you take your monthly overhead, and divide that by 30. And so that gives you your average daily overhead.
Excuse me, Jason, by equivalents, you're talking about accounts receivable, correct?
Yes, although I'd be a little bit cautious. During a time like this, receivables aren't as trustworthy. So cash and things that could be exchanged for cash quickly. Yeah.
Okay.
Maybe not receivables. I usually actually have two metrics. I have one that's based on liquid, days liquid, and then a days cash. And the days cash would be more conservative. It wouldn't include all receivables. Yes.
Yeah.
So when I say days cash, I'm not including receivables in most cases. Yeah.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah, Clark, that would be particularly true for Clark when he's saying that people just say, I'm not paying you. Or he's not paying them and they're not paying him. When you hit the pandemic, everybody stops paying everybody. So receivables don't become very liquid.
Right.
Right. And so I would have a days liquid figure that I'm also tracking on my dashboard.
What else other than cash is liquid?
Securities that could be, or certificates of deposit, money markets, that kind of stuff. It's really cash. That's why I call it days cash. Yeah. Good question.
Anyway, I interrupted you before you finished the formula. So for the questioner.
Okay. Yes. Yeah. So it's essentially cash and cash equivalents divided by average daily overhead. Yeah, so so it's cash and things that you can convert to cash almost immediately, divided by your average daily overhead. And the daily overhead is going to be your monthly overhead, divided by 30.
And you're going to come up with a number after that. And what's a good number?
Right. So the rule of thumb that I use is 45 days because most business owners cannot make a meaningful change to their business model, can't really pivot in less than about 6 weeks. And so I use 45 days cash as a rule of thumb, but some people say, hey, I can pivot a lot faster than that. And so there might be a little latitude there. Some people say, hey, I can't pivot in 45 days. I encourage all of them to come up with a value for their time, what we call time to pivot. So we actually come up with a value called time to pivot that they're using, in case if I needed to make a meaningful change, how long is it going to take me to do that? So we might actually have a days cash goal that's different for some businesses than others. Yeah. And realistically speaking, most small business clients, and I work with a lot of very small first stage businesses, 10 employees or less, $1 million or $2 million in revenue, that size business. And a lot of them, if they have a week cash, that's a lot. And so it really stretches them to start thinking in terms of several, 6 weeks of cash.
One thing that I forgot to ask you guys in terms of future, we see, President Trump has been pushing on trade deals quite a bit since he was first elected. And now we're seeing some significant pressures given the pandemic on global trade. And so I'm wondering what you see, particularly, Clark, I know you do a lot of sourcing of your cable internationally, and Andrew, a lot of your business, clothing and sensors, sounds like it's international. What kind of changes do you see happening going forward?
Well, we actually started a while ago trying to move our manufacturing facilities to Vietnam and other places other than China, mostly due to the trade import fees and export fees. So now we just have more of a reason to do it, but it's a big ship to move, and I mean we I don't know when the tariffs came out, but a couple of years ago, and that's when we started.
Mm-hmm. And have you moved your sourcing, or you're still getting?
Yes, we have, not 100%, but 20% maybe.
Andrew, your thoughts?
Yeah, I think Clark wouldn't be alone. Most of the on the clothing side follows the cheapest place to have clothes manufactured, and that has China's kind of fallen out of that first spot, and as Clark said, moved to Vietnam and other places that where labor is cheap, probably more significant to me, and it would be the the effect we might have on the sensor side, because we do bring in some of that material from China, not all of it, but a good bit of it. And what we have found, and I don't want to have a universal principle based on just my experience, but my experience has been that it's very important to have the right partner. And we've been fortunate that when we were initially establishing a relationship with our manufacturer there, I spent time in China with them, and Rob Ratterman, my partner, has continued to do the same. So I think a lot of it is having the right partner. Obviously, things are beyond their control, and things can change. But if you don't have the right partner, I think those will affect you a lot quicker and a lot more significantly than if you do have the right partner. And we've just been very fortunate to have solid relationships there.
Yeah. Doris, were there any more questions that you thought would be relevant?
Yeah, I think that there's a really good, all the questions are tremendous, and we promise we'll try to get to all of them, even if not now. We'll follow up later on, and you'll certainly have an opportunity to email also the panelists. But there's one question. Do any of you have an example of an idea you thought was good in the moment to survive a downturn, but with retrospect, you would have taken a different course of action? So anything that you thought, was a great idea at the time, but then now looking back, maybe wasn't so good, or vice versa.
Nobody likes to tell you about their ideas that did. Nobody talks to tell you about the stocks that went down that they bought. Certainly we've had, matter of fact, Rob Ratterman and I thought that building software that would empower other people, other 501c3s like Goodwill, to access the eBay marketplace would be a good idea. We spent a significant amount of resources and time developing software to do that, and it was a dud. It was bust. So all the ideas we've had hadn't been home runs, but that was an idea that looked good, sounded good. We tried to execute on it, but it just, at the end of the day, didn't meet a big enough need in the marketplace. All right, Jason, you talk about one of your failures. I told one of mine. It's your turn.
I'm going to pass.
All right.
Yes.
Well, Clark, did you want to add something?
No, I'm not going to share any of my failures.
You're
Okay.
a smart man. You're
All
a
right,
smart man.
then let me ask the panel. I think that's a safe question. Okay, everybody should be able to speak to that. Does the panel think social distancing will be with us for a long time? Not just a pandemic, but the social distancing, and how can businesses make themselves more elastic in a social distancing world? So, do you think that's going to continue for a while? And how can we, as businesses, prepare?
I think it is going to continue for a while. It's going to be small things like shaking hands, hugging, two things that are ingrained in us. And it's extremely difficult to maintain a 6-foot radius around you without having anybody enter. So I don't think we're going to be too successful with that. That's just my opinion.
Mm-hmm.
Anybody else?
I think we like to hug and we like to touch, and I think that's going to, as soon as we get back to work, I think that the people are going to get back to I think that's an ingrained habit in us and something we want to do anyway. So I think it's going to be hard to break that. I don't think we will be able to.
I don't know how long it's going to be with us, but when I was in Africa during a cholera outbreak, and the culture there shakes hands, if you can imagine, even more than in the States. And in this particular country that I was in, shaking hands, you shake hands sometimes at the beginning, during, the middle, and at the end of the conversation, you know. And so the behavior there changed for a matter of months around the cholera outbreak. And it was actually very similar to what's going on now. It was, you know, there were public health announcements and public service announcements and posters encouraging people to not shake hands and that kind of thing. My observation was, though, within about a year, behavior pretty much returned to what it was before. So I don't know if has any bearing on what we're seeing, but I was asking myself that question at the time. Is this the end of handshaking in this country? And it wasn't.
Thank you. All right, so there is a great question. So we have business owners amongst us who have excess cash on hand, which is wonderful. So where would you invest it right now while others are in a holding pattern? Now, any advice, let me just put a disclaimer, any advice given here, right?
I'm going to pass on that question because I don't have a good track record on what to do with my excess cash.
Got it.
Well, Doris, are you saying the question is what kind of investments to make outside of your business, or?
Yeah, where would you invest it right now? Yeah, that's how I understand the question.
Okay, because what I've noticed with entrepreneurs is they tend to reinvest in their business first, in all their businesses. So they're not as much, you know, financial types who are always looking to invest in stocks and, you know, in the stock market, because they have faith in their business.
Yeah.
More than they do in you know, in someone else's business, let's say. So they're unless their business can't grow anymore, you know, they don't need any more money to invest in it. I think that tends to be where people put their money.
Like buying another business will work well with their existing business, that kind of thing.
Yeah, or I mean, look at your business. You've been expanding it to other states.
Yeah.
So,
you know,
business, but expanding it.
You know, right after the economic downturn, 2008, 2009, there were $3 trillion of business assets that went up for sale. And, you know, companies sold. There was just this rummage sale. And so that kind of goes to your point, Dr. Mulford. And in terms of investing in your own business, you know, the years following that, this is anecdotal, but I've had a number of conversations with people that do similar work to what I do. And they said that, you know, the years following the downturn were great times to start a business and great times to hire. You could build incredible teams because there was a bunch of talent that was looking for a home. And so that I think that we're likely to see similar types of things happen following, you know, this crisis.
Good point. I know that Andrew is an expert at buying things at a good price. And so that's sort of dovetailing with what you said, Jason, is finding those assets that are undervalued in the way that you can utilize them. I remember several years ago, we had a guest speaker at Regent, and he spoke about the acquisitions he did over a 25-year period. And it was in a very mundane business, meat packaging. And his stock outperformed the S&P 500 by more than 10 percentage points a year over that 25-year period. And I said, well, how could you do that? I mean, these are just mundane businesses. He said, well, it was like a third generation business. First generation, the guy knew how to run it. Next generation, they weren't that interested. And by the third generation, they had no interest. And the thing was running into the ground. So I offered them what it was worth, which was almost nothing. And I was able to turn it around because I knew how to run that business. So I think being in a business you understand, you know, that's a good place to invest if you're an entrepreneur.
And Dr. Morford's right. I'm so cheap, I'm not even paying the electricity bill. See how dark it is behind me? Sorry. I do think Dr. Mulford's right. Most entrepreneurs will say, "I'd rather bet on my game than someone else's," and you know, I think that's probably if you look at the track record for most entrepreneurs, you know, fortunately they do that because all of our businesses, as we said earlier, all of them aren't hits, aren't home runs. So we have to continue to find the next best thing, and most entrepreneurs are going to, I have found, will continue to invest in opportunities that they think will be advantageous for them.
One thing you guys haven't mentioned, you mentioned a little bit, but it's interesting that both Clark and Andrew's businesses include an area of recurring revenue. Clark with alarm system monitoring and Andrew with the sensor monitoring. And that's a nice business to be in. You know, if you can do a lot of installations and then you can have recurring revenue that doesn't require you to be doing new installations, it gives you some cushion during downtimes. Any comment on that from either of you guys?
Well, Clark can speak to it better than I can, I'm sure. But if you look at the multiple of a hardware or software business, say look at of just the hardware software that we sell, and you look at the multiple of a subscription business, you can easily quantify the value of a subscription business. The market gives it substantially higher multiples. So for that reason, it's a great leg of a business that can potentially become a whole body and become a business in and of itself, or at least we hope so.
Yeah, I would second that. It's I mean, just in the alarm industry, the monthly multiple is anywhere from 30 to, it's been as high as 60. When a company sold to ADT, ADT paid 60 times the monthly monitoring fees, and there's a reason they paid that. It's that good. So in my case, in both downturns, the 2009, I survived by selling my recurring revenue. That's how I ended up staying in business. And I've since built it back up to where I can run pretty much all my daily operations, not total payroll, but office payroll, just on my recurring revenue profit. So it's extremely important to my business. And that's something that's purchasable. So if I wanted to invest, I could buy recurring revenue from a number of different sources.
And what is that now, Clark? What is that, if it as high as 60, what is that recurring revenue worth now in today's market?
It's gone down quite a bit. It's probably, it all depends on the size of the recurring revenue. So if you have a small, it might be as low as 30, or the average, I think, is somewhere around 40.
That's still significant.
Yeah.
Are there questions that you've found, Doris, that you?
Well, there are a lot of questions. Let's. How about we're gonna ask one final question, and then just in the respect of time for everybody, I think we need to bring our time to an end here. But there's a question still about the investment opportunities. One of our attendees asked, can we broaden that question to include the passive investor rather than the entrepreneur? What industries will thrive, which will recede? So if you would have any insights on that, just not the entrepreneurial investor, but just your regular passive investor. What are some good industries to think about? I know many of us wanted to be invested in technology right now. So
Zoom.
Yeah. Probably too expensive already.
Too late.
Yeah, webcams. You can't buy one in the country right now. They all been blocked to run Zoom conferences.
Right.
I was serious when I mentioned sensors. There are sensor manufacturers that the sensor business, and you just look at the history of it and how much it's grown in the last 5 years, 4 years, 3 years, and just look at the growth, and it's a hockey stick now, and it's going to continue to be that way. I think the opportunities for sensors, as they get smaller and less expensive, the applications are going to get to be huge, and there will be companies that will take advantage of that. And personally, I have invested money in sensor companies, not beyond my own company. So I'm convinced of it to that extent.
Thank you.
That probably means don't invest in sensor companies.
That's too funny.
Well, very good. I think we need to bring our time to an end. Dr. Mulford, are you okay with that?
Yes.
Yeah, well, thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Mulford, and to all the panelists for an amazing webinar. To all of our attendees, this has been recorded. We will edit it, just put an intro to it, and then just as soon as this is ready, we will certainly make it available to all of you, including our contact information, so that I know there are still a lot of questions out there. We simply don't have time to address all of them. But we want to continue to stand with you, and your questions are important, they're great. And we have the experts here for you that are willing to just give back. And as you've seen from tonight, they have shared from their heart and a wealth of expertise and knowledge through the good and the bad times. And it truly is our prayer as you listen tonight, that you leave this time encouraged, that you leave this time knowing that you are not alone, that especially as business leaders and entrepreneurs, there's no other group of people that is more resilient and resourceful than you. So you will have the creativity and the innovation that is needed to make it through this pandemic and to come out on the other side successfully and thriving. Or you will simply rebuild and you will do something completely different. But this is not the end for any one of us. The most important thing right now is for us all to stay safe, to stay healthy, and to keep in prayer for one another, for our country, for our leadership. So if you don't mind, allow me just to end our time in a quick word of prayer. Well, Father, I thank you for this time. And Father, we just pray your blessing over all these business leaders. Father, I pray that you give them creativity and innovative ideas, Father, what they could do to pivot in their business, in their operations. Father, I pray that you fill them with your hope and with your encouragement, because you own everything and nothing is impossible with you. And I pray all these things in Jesus' name. Panelists, you have been absolutely, absolutely amazing. Thank you. I've learned so much from you. You are tremendous experts. Dr. Mulford, once again, thank you for your excellence in all things.
Absolutely.
Okay, goodbye, everybody.